Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. This is Saul Weinreb, the host of your podcast, and we're about to study the book of Job, Sefer Iyov, chapter 28, that is Perek Chaf Ches. And we are in the middle of Iyov's monologue, and Iyov just very beautifully and very dramatically described the life of the wicked person who is constantly dealing with his anxieties and his worries. Yes, he might have wealth, but that wealth is never something that he's ever able to truly enjoy. Only a tzaddik is able to wear the clothing and enjoy the clothing. Only a righteous person can enjoy that. The person who is constantly searching for more, constantly taking things away from others, constantly lying, cheating, just in order to get some worldly pleasure, never ever has a chance to relax, right? And enjoy that what the world has given him and what the world has to offer. He tries to pray to God, but prayer doesn't help when you live a life of deceit, when you live a life of falsehood. And then he continues Iyov in chapter 28, verse 1, Ki yesh la kesef motza. There is a place where you can go and find silver, right? Remember, Iyov had just described to us how this person is being blown by the winds of anxiety. He's constantly running, chasing to get more. And he can. There is a place you can go. You can go to the silver mine and dig and find silver. Umakom lazahav yazoku. And there is a place where they refine gold. You can go to the gold factories and you can get gold, right? So he keeps running to these places because he's constantly trying to get more. Barzel me'afar yukach. You can get iron from the ground. V'even yatzuk nechusha. And you can get copper or bronze, which comes out of the stones that from which it's mined, and you can melt it down. God does make a place, a boundary for darkness, right? Right? And in other words, God, there's in other words, there is a world that we can explore. God said there is darkness up to this point. In other words, there's a point beyond which we cannot understand. But there's a huge world which we can search. Right? And the person, does search out all the places that he can. The limits of what he can search, he searches. Right? What Iyov is about to say here is that man can work, can try, can struggle, can try to understand, can try to extract riches from Ethan, Ophel, B'tzalmavas. There are stones that are deep down in the deepest darkness. Literally, Talmavas is the shadows of death. We can dig deep down into these quarries and caves and mines in order to obtain these precious items, right? Otherwise, if we're seeking worldly things, we can and we do search the world and try to extract from it these benefits. Poratz nachal me'im gar. They open up a nachal, a wadi, right? If Me'im Gar, from a faraway place where people live. In other words, they can build canals in the desert, Hanishkachim mini ragel, places where people haven't even walked because it's so far out in the wilderness. But they can manage to build dig out these canals in order to bring water. Dalu me'anoshna'u, places where there are no humans traveling, far away from where people are, but they can go and get water from them. Eretz mimena yetze lachem, they can find earth and land to farm from which they can get new bread. V'tachtel nepach k'mo eish, and but beneath it, it has become like fire. In other words, after they extract all of the fertility from the ground, it becomes like a burnt ground, which is no longer fertile. In other words, we can extract all the fertility from the land. Mekom sapir avoneha, they find from its place of sapphire stones. They get stones from the afro zohav lo, and it even contains the dust of gold in order to make more gold. Nasiv lo yidao ayit, right? These paths, right, to these faraway places that people are exploiting, right? Iyov is giving us a visual of people extracting from the earth the pleasures that they want, the riches that they want, the wealth that they want, that they can get, because people have the power to go to the ends of the earth. the faraway places, even places, pathways that even vultures haven't flown. V'lo shezafatu ein ayah, and the ayah, which is another kind of bird which flies very high in the sky, has not even seen these places. That's how far out they are, and that's where we're going and exploiting these places for their wealth. Lo hidrichu v'nei shachatz, the wild beasts haven't even walked over there. Lo ada alav shachal. Shachal is usually another name for lion. Had not even walked upon this land. Bachalamish shalach yado. But the person sends his hand. In other words, he takes the flint rock, hofach mishoresh harim, and he overturns mountains by their roots. In other words, we dig up mountains. And we see this today, where we can dig up a mountain in order to obtain the wealth of whatever it is we're mining for that's within the mountain. Batsurosi orim bikeya, he carves out in rocks. He carves out yorim. These are water channels or water, or paths for water. V'chol yikoro asaino, and he can see all kinds of wealth with his eyes. Mibechin haros chibesh. All right, he can bind up the flowings of the rivers. In other words, we can dam the huge rivers, and when we do that, v'ta'aluma yotzi are things that are hidden, that are, down from the dam. Once you dam up a river, then the things that the river used to flow over are now revealed. You can now see them. Things that we haven't seen before are now brought to light. So in these first 11 verses, Eov described the incredible amount of power that a human being has and human beings bring to bear when they search out wealth and when they search out what this world has to offer them, right? And we can go and we can try. Remember, this comes in context of describing that person, the person who's never satisfied with what he has and always wants more. And there's a lot you can do on this world alone. If you ignore God and you search, you can destroy the entire planet searching for wealth and exploit it, searching for precious metals, damming rivers, tearing mountains, etc. It's very hard not to see in this an environmental message, but it's important to recognize that the ideas of preserving the environment that we have today in this century are not at all something that was in their consciousness back then. But nonetheless, it's still very difficult not to get a sense from Eov that he's criticizing those who tear up the earth in search of riches. In the context of what he's talking about, the person who's so selfish that he can go and tear up the world just for his own benefit, it's hard not to see an environmental message in this. But I do want to acknowledge that I recognize that his primary message here is to say that a human being can go and search for all of these riches, but as you remember from the last chapter 27, in the end he'll never be satisfied. No matter what he does, he'll never be satisfied. But what can a person search? What does a person truly need in order to have some sense of satisfaction with what he has? That is chokhmah, that is wisdom. And that's what we're about to read in verse 12. Chokhmah, but wisdom, may ayin timotzei. Where can you find wisdom? You can't go all the way out into the wilderness and dig up a wisdom mine, right? No matter how many jackhammers you bring and bulldozers you bring, you can't dig up chokhmah. No matter how deep you dig your mine, chokhmah, wisdom, is not something you're going to find at the bottom of the mine. Ve'ezeh makom bina. And where is the place where you find understanding? An understanding of the world around us, an understanding of the meaning and the purpose of what we're doing here. Lo yada enosh erka. This is a value, is a treasure that no one can even put a value on. V'lo simotzei be'eretz hachayim. And this is something that you cannot find in the land of the living, which literally means you cannot find it in this on planet Earth. You cannot find it by going through the forests and the mountains and the rivers. That's not where you're going to find wisdom, right? To whom Omar lo bihi, the depths of the sea say, no, you're looking for it down here. You want to come scuba dive, send a submarine hundreds of feet, thousands of feet down into the water. You're not going to find wisdom there. V'yom Omar eini madi, the sea says, you're not going to find wisdom here. You can send ships long distances to travel, sail across the sea. No, you're not going to find it at the other side of the ocean. That's not where you're going to find wisdom. Lo yutan sigor tachteha. You can't give a price for no matter how much gold you give, right? You can go to the store and try to buy wisdom. You can give $100, $1,000, $10,000, $1,000,000. No matter how much gold you give, you're not going to buy wisdom. V'lo yishokel kesef michira. There is no silver that can be weighed out as a price for wisdom. Lo sisule b'chesem ofir, right? You cannot measure it out with the gold of Ophir. Ophir is a land probably somewhere on the Horn of Africa, for which was known as a source of very fine gold, right? Even that gold you cannot use to purchase wisdom. Bishoham yokar v'sapir, nor if you give precious stones like onyx or sapphire. Lo yarchena zavu zechuches, right? Gold and glass. Zechochit is glass, which nowadays might be cheap, but then glass was a very precious item, right? So you cannot match its value with gold or glass, utumurasok klifaz, and you cannot exchange it, right, for vessels of pure gold. Ramot v'gavish lo yizacher. Ramot is probably crystal, and gavish is probably coral, which comes from the sea. Cannot be mentioned, right? In other words, you don't come in and say, "Oh, I have coral, I have crystal." And the value of chachma, the value of wisdom, is more than the value of pninim, which can be translated as pearls or rubies, but some sort of precious stone. Lo ya'archena pitidat kush. The pitida is another precious stone. I see it translated often as topaz. All of these translations are not 100% clear. But the bottom line is it's a precious stone of some sort that comes from the land of Kush. Is not enough to weigh against it, to value it. Bekesem toharlo tisula, pure gold cannot be weighed against it. So v'hachachma me'ayin tavo. So where does chachma come from? Where does one get wisdom from? Right? In other words, ve'ezem kombino. Where is the place where one can mine understanding? Right? We can go to all these places. We can try to buy it. We can try to mine it. But you're not going to find it there. We can take a sailboat all the way across the Pacific Ocean, and you're not going to find some lost island where there's a fountain of wisdom and you're going to get it. It just doesn't work that way, right? In other words, remember, this is in the context of Eov talking about the Rasha, the evil person, the deceitful person who's constantly trying to gather more, destroying the world, destroying the environment around him in order to enrich himself, but never being satisfied. How does one be satisfied? How does one be able to enjoy what he has in this world and build a real relationship with God that's not based on fake prayer and fake piety? Remember, this is all a continuation of Eov 27, and if you have to go back to 27 to remember what it is that Eov has been saying, right? Where does one go? Verse 21, V'nel mamene kolchai. It is hidden from all living people. People look around and they can't find this wisdom. They can't find this understanding. Umeof hashamayim nistara. The birds in the sky, it's hidden from them. Avadon v'maves amru. Right? The avadon is maybe related to abandonment. Is a similar. It sounds similar, but avadon is the depth of the depth of death, and death have said bi'aznenu shamanu shema. We've heard about it. We've heard there's such a thing as wisdom. If you go all the way down to the deepest depths of the deep, where the dead lie, and ask, where's wisdom? They'll tell you down there. Well, we've heard about it, but we don't know where it is. Elohim hevin darko. Only God knows and understands the way to wisdom. V'hu yadas mekomo. He's the one that knows the place. So if you're going to find it, right, that's the only place to go, is to turn to God. It is God that can see to the ends of the earth. Remember, Eov started off this chapter by saying God made a place for darkness, right? Beyond here, up till here, even though described all these far out places that we can explore, but there's still an end. There's still a point beyond which a human being cannot understand and cannot see, but God can see all the way till the ends. Tachat kol hashamayim yireh. He's able to see everything that is beneath the heavens. Lasot l'ruach mishkol. God can give a weight to the wind. Now, Eov is going to list things here, which in his time, in his context, these were things that human beings were not able to understand. Some of these things today we can understand, but the point is the same, that there is a point of wisdom beyond which a human cannot comprehend. And of course, that point is comprehending God himself, right? A lot of these things that we do understand. He can understand the weight of the winds, right? Nowadays, of course, we have a lot more understanding of that. But that's something that in his day, they could not understand. How to measure the wind, how big is the wind, what direction is the wind coming from. Umayin tikain b'midah, he can measure out the water. He knows how much water there is in the oceans and the rivers and the lakes and the seas. He is the one who made the rules of the rain, right? We cannot understand when it rains, why it rains, but he made those rules with derech lachaziz kolos. He made the path, the way for the sounds of thunder that accompany the rains. Ozra vayisapra. He, that God, the God that sees, that knows, that understands it all, the creator of it all, he saw chachma, he saw wisdom, and he has told us about wisdom. Hechina, he has prepared. And this harkens back to chapter 27, where we all prepare. The rich man prepares all of the fancy clothes in his closet, but never actually enjoys it. But God prepares wisdom for us, begam chakara, and understands this wisdom. And God searched out this wisdom and made it in such a way that we can access it. Vayomer la'adam, and he said to the human being, God said to the human being, how does one access this wisdom? Hein yiras Adonai hi chachma. It is fear of God. That is wisdom. Now, fear of God is, I've translated it that way because it's the common translation, but it's not the correct translation. Yirah does not mean fear in this context. It means awe of God is wisdom. In other words, looking at the creation around us, the creation that was so incredibly powerfully described by Eov, the awe that one feels towards God, that when one recognizes the vastness of his creation and the greatness of the wisdom of God who created the world around us, that feeling of awe, visur meira, and turning away from deceit and lies and selfishness and arrogance, turning away from evil, bina, that is what brings understanding. This is what God tells us. You don't have to travel across the sea or dig to the depths of the deep or tear apart mountains or dam up rivers, etc., in order to obtain chachma. That's what you have to do in order to obtain worldly wealth. But to obtain wisdom, to obtain understanding, one needs to be in awe of the world, of the creation around us. One needs to be in awe of God and his creation, and one needs to turn away from the path of deceit. So here, this concludes chapter 28, and here we have Eov, rather than give us an answer to the question of the Odyssey, Eov has now found a path. He has found meaning in the in the life of a tzaddik, in the life of a righteous person, right? And he has found lack of meaning in the life of a rasha, in the life of an evil person. He's still left with the big question, though. But I still don't understand why an evil person should get to prosper and why a good person should have to suffer, right? Which he's going to address later. But he has found a glimmer of understanding of the world, which helps a little bit. And it helps us also understand Eov's own motivation. Why did Eov not give up on God? Because he could not leave the path of chachma, wisdom, and understanding. Despite all the suffering that he was going through, despite the fact that he doesn't understand and wishes he could understand God's ways, but can't, right? He still refuses to give up the path of God. He still refuses to give up the path of wisdom and understanding. Thank you so much for paying attention to and studying with me with chapter 28. Looking forward to studying chapter 29 as Eov continues his monologue and the rest of this incredibly powerful, incredibly wise book of Eov. Have a wonderful day.